Good morning. Hey everyone, you don't have to stop socializing. I just wanted to go over a couple logistics before today. So my name is Laura Kroger. I'm the Assistant Director for Strategic Initiatives in the Office of Research and Innovation. And I had good afternoon, but it's not good afternoon yet. So I wanted to say good morning. Welcome to Research Week at NC State. We're very excited you're here with us today. We are going to be recording today's presentations to also allow anyone who wants to review today's presentations or wasn't able to join us today. That'll be posted on our Research Week webpage within the next week. Before we get started, just random logistics. We do have bathrooms right outside the front entrance to your left and right. We also have a break service that will be here throughout the day. So go ahead and grab coffee, water, and there are a couple of snacks if you were able to grab that early. And I haven't had to say this for a long time, but please silence your cell phones. So you don't have to turn them off, but please put those on vibrate so we do not interrupt today. One of the things I want to mention, we'll have our speakers up here, and then we're going to try something kind of new for Q&A. We will have live Q&A and ask anybody to raise your hand if you're willing to do that and have the microphone passed to you. But we're also going to bring a slide up here to have anonymous question submissions. So when that slide comes up, the numbers are going to be pretty small at the top, so I'll read them out as well. But you will want to have your cell phone on you, and you're going to type in something called menti.com, and when it's Q&A, I'll quickly go over this again. But if you have your cell phone with you, you can also anonymously submit a question, and I'll be reading those out as well to both of our presenters and our speakers. I do think I'm going to give just a couple more minutes for people to come in and settle. So this is your last chance to grab a coffee, tea, snack before we begin today's presentation. I'll jump up here probably at 10:05, and we'll get things started. Oh, last thing for lunch. If you are a vegan, if you are someone who had asked for a vegan meal, please find me or one of my team members who are at the registration table, and we'll make sure that's given to you. And I'll remind everyone of that when lunch starts again. But that was my last thing.
Check 1, 1, 2, 1, 2.
All right. So at this time, we're going to begin our program, and I'm going to ask the Vice Chancellor, Dr. Mladen Vouk, to come up and say a quick welcome, and then we will turn to our keynote speaker. So, Dr. Vouk.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It is a pleasure and a privilege to be able to have this opportunity to address you. I'd like to thank Laura for helping with the whole organization, and in fact, many thanks to everybody else who was involved in the organizing this. I know it's a lot of work, and I hope you're going to enjoy it. So, this one is the 4th annual research week at NC State, and it gives us a chance to celebrate the importance of research and some of the remarkable feats of our NC State community and what they accomplish on a daily basis. This week we will have a special focus on research impacts, which are important. And we have some great events planned and resources to share with you and the whole research community. To register for the upcoming events and view resources, please visit the Research Week webpage, which can be, I'm told, easily found by scanning the QR code, which I don't see here, but you'll find it. Anyway, it is today a special honor to introduce to you keynote speaker whose work and inventions have worldwide beneficial impact and recognition. Dr. Baliga is a Progress Energy Distinguished University Professor in the Department of Electrical and Computer Engineering here at NC State. Before joining NC State, Dr. Baliga spent 15 years at the General Electric R&D Center, leading their power device efforts. Professor Baliga invented, developed, and commercialized the insulated gate bipolar transistor, IGBT, which is extensively used in many sectors of the economy. And that particular device has bootstrapped enormous reduction in energy consumption and has resulted in huge cost savings to consumers, as well as a reduction in carbon dioxide emissions worldwide. For these accomplishments, he was bestowed by GE their highest recognition rank of a Coolidge Fellow. He joined NC State in 1988, and the recognitions of his work continued. He became member of the National Academy of Engineering in 1993, and for his work and his impacts, he was recognized by NC State with the Alexander Holiday Medal and the UNC System Max Gardner Award, 2 highest honors. He also was honored with the nation's top recognition, the National Medal of Technology and Innovation, in 2001 by President Obama. And with the IEEE Medal of Honor in 2014 and the Global Energy Prize in 2015. Dr. Baliga has launched 4 startups with successful products, and in addition, he has authored 27 books or edited 27 books and over 700 publications. He holds 123 patents and was inducted into both the National Academy of Inventors and the National Inventors Hall of Fame as the sole inventor of IGBT. Dr. Baliga's presentation is a perfect kickoff to our theme of this week, research impacts. Dr. Baliga's research contributions have benefited billions of people with energy savings, cost savings, carbon dioxide reduction, and more. Please help me welcome Dr. J. Baliga.
Well, good morning, everyone. Dr. Vouk asked me this morning to speak about my experience in translating my research into impactful products with benefit to society. So I'll try to do that. So as you saw in the title of my slide, I've had 50 years of experience working in the semiconductor field. And I call it my journey of discoveries, where I found a lot of gems, which I'd like to share with you. So I've categorized them into several areas. The first is process technology, and some of these I'll talk about. The next is the area of power rectifiers. These are important devices that we use in power electronic circuits, without which they would not run efficiently. The third category is something I've named MOS-gated thyristors. We found these to be working quite well, but they are yet to be utilized because they're meant for very high voltage applications. Then there's a category we call smart power technology, which has taken off in a big way since the 1980s, which I had a hand in developing. And then there's a very special device that I created, which I call the super linear MOSFET. And this was successfully commercialized in one of my companies, so I'll talk about that a little bit. And finally, a broad category of devices, which is the main focus of my work. These are devices that have led to a lot of commercial impact as well. So what I tried to do in this slide is to highlight in red all the things that actually became commercialized, which is not too bad. But the information on this is documented among my 700 plus research papers, a lot of them with my colleagues at GE, and then of course my students here at NC State. And then of course I've been issued 123 US patents which have this information as well. But I've also written 28 books. One just got published, Mladen, so you had 27, it got published. So I keep writing books. So the purpose of writing these books was to expound and provide in detail information about my innovations. And in a sense, I'm doing proselytizing. I'm using this opportunity to tell people how these ideas work and their benefits so that they might think about commercializing the ideas. So this is something those of you who are doing research might think about doing. It's an arduous task. It takes a lot of time and determination and good planning to accomplish it. But I've written all of these books in recent years. Many of them are textbooks that are used around the world. Others are reference books that people use. In fact, my books, I'm told, have had 200,000 downloads already, which is quite a large number for a specialized area like my own. Okay, so what I wanted to do in this talk is to kind of go over my 50-year journey, and I broke it down into various compartments. So I will start by when I first came to the United States as a graduate student from India after getting my bachelor's degree. And I was fortunate to be given a research assistantship at RPI, Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute, by Professor Gandhi. What I did not realize till I got here is that I was the first student from India allowed to enter the department, and that faculty at RPI had great reservations about students not being successful in taking the arduous coursework and being successful. But I did not find it hard at all, and I got a straight 4.0 grade point average, after which they said, oh, maybe students from India are okay, so they started letting more in. So that was nice. I'm not sure those who came later realized that I opened the door for them. So let me tell you a little bit about my research there, because looking back, it's actually pretty cool. So firstly, professor asked me to look into doing some diffusions of zinc into gallium arsenide to create PN junctions. So at that time, there was no way to make what we call planar junctions. And planar junctions, for those who work on silicon technology know, are the very foundation of our silicon technology, without which Intel would not have made the first ICs, and then that led to the microprocessors. They're the very foundation of what we do. But that was not possible in gallium arsenide, and I thought about it, and I thought, hey, maybe the reason is the stress between the mask used for stopping the diffusion and the underlying material. So that was my hypothesis, and I thought I should explore whether this is true, and I came up with some very elegant experiments that prove that it actually is true, and actually found a way to make change that stress and make planar junctions for the first time. So that's a very nice thing to do just for a master's thesis. Then I told the professor that I want to make some high-speed transistors. And I think by using indium arsenide and gallium indium arsenide, which have high electron mobility, we can make much faster, higher frequency transistors than in silicon. So he said, how would you like to do it? I said, we have to build a reactor. It's called chloride transport. And he said, I'm sorry, I don't have money to build this machine, but I have another student, Paul Smith, who wants to try an entirely new way of growing layers. It's called MOCVD, metal organic chemical vapor deposition, and he wants to go gallium arsenide. And at this point, that has been done only in one other place in the world, that's at Rockwell. So we'll try to copy that and then see if we can grow those layers. But he said, you can join him and add the materials required to make the other materials, like indium arsenide and gallium indium arsenide. So as a good student, I went to the library. There was no internet in those days. And looked up material, and I found that the precursors, that is triethyl indium and trimethyl gallium, detonate on exposure to air. That's what it said, detonate, not burn. And then I was going to mix it with extremely poisonous arsine gas. So I said, wow, this is like creating a bomb in the lab, and this could kill everybody, including myself. So I went back to him and said, do you know this? And he said, yeah, but don't worry about it. I'll buy you a canary. So, so for many years, I would say, you owe me one canary, which he never gave me. Anyway, so Paul Smith and I spent the next year and a half carefully designing and building this reactor with our hands, tightening all the joints to make sure they're airtight, doing a lot of leak checking because our lives were at stake. And then we fired up the machine, and fortunately it didn't blow up. And he was able to grow gallium arsenide layers, and his PhD was on that topic. But then I tried to apply these other compounds and grow my layers, and nothing would come out. It was so frustrating. We get tiny crystals growing, and it took me a long time, and finally I figured out the reason. And after about a year and a half, I was able to get very fine layers, not only of indium arsenide, but the entire composition of gallium indium arsenide from 0 to 1. And I said, now I'm ready to make transistors. And the professor said, no, you've done plenty. You just write your thesis and graduate. You've done enough. So I said, okay. But meanwhile, because I was sharing this reactor, I had a little extra time. When Paul was using the machine, I could do other experiments. So I started growing MOCVD layers of all these oxides, which was very pioneering work as well. So curiously, this technology has now become the standard technology for growing materials for electronic purposes, but at that time it was in its infancy. So when I started applying for jobs, people said, oh, we don't know anything about this new way of growing stuff. We don't know whether it's going to be of any value. So in fact, I couldn't even get a job interview at IBM or Bell Labs. Later I found out that this was also a recession in 1974. And of course, I was on a student visa, so there were many other reasons for them denying me that. But at RPI, there was another student, because GE Research Labs are only 15 miles away, who I had worked with, and he was working at GE, and I'd helped him. And he was impressed by my work, and he told GE, you need to hire this guy for your new power device effort. So that was my next phase, and that was 15 years, as Mladen mentioned, my work at GE. So at that point, GE was having strong competition from companies in Europe, like at that time ASEA and Brown Boveri, who later became ABB and Siemens, et cetera. And so they decided to put together a new power device effort, which I joined with 2 other people, and then we grew the effort, and then after a few years, they asked me to lead it. So I ended up with about 40 people, including about a dozen PhDs. So during that phase, I did a lot of work, which led to innovations. But let me just say that this is not a job I took very easily, because power devices were already in 1975, 25 years old, and there was a feeling that everything novel had already been done. So it's not exactly a ripe area to go into for a job, but we were able to do a lot of innovations, and I came up with many ideas, which I'll share some of them with you, that have transformed that field. But unfortunately, in 1988, the chairman of the company, who had invested $1 billion in IC technology, including a fab in Research Triangle Park, got really upset that, I'll use the right terms, upset, and not four-letter words like he did, upset that he was not making money on it, and he decided the whole semiconductor business needs to be sold, and the power business was part of it. So that was very disconcerting, to say the least. So GE said they will move me up in management, in which case I would stop doing research. And then people from outside GE heard about this and started making me job offers to come and work on power devices at companies. But during my tenure at GE, I'd been hiring a lot of engineers as I grew the group. And I found that no university was teaching anybody about power devices. They had programs on ICs, but not on power. So I would bring them in and train them. And I felt, hey, maybe it's good to go to a university and start the first program to do power device research. So I looked around and I found that what I need is a very good clean room facility. And most university clean rooms are okay for doing small experiments, but not for building complex devices like I was. But I found that in North Carolina, there was a big investment made by the state in a facility called MCNC, Microelectronics Center of North Carolina, which I'm sure you're all familiar with. It was set up with the millions of dollars of funding to do 1.25 micron VLSI technology at that time, cutting edge at that time. And I said, if I can get my hands on it, and I'm building power devices with 5 micron technology, I'll be in pretty good shape. But there was no guarantee that they would let me use this facility, right? It was set up by the state for a different purpose. So when I interviewed, I told Dr. Masnari, who was head of the department, later he became dean, and the dean at that time, that I need to go to MCNC during my interview and convince the president that he allowed me to use this facility. So I did that, and I gave him a presentation about my vision of what I want to do in the power area, and that this would be an exciting thing to do. And his response was, well, we have a certain mission, and we cannot use those funds for your purposes, but if you're willing to pay the full load of using the facility, we will allow you to use it. And I said, okay. So now my next job is to find the funds, right? So I said, okay, I'll come to NC State and start a program. And I went around the country looking for money to try to get funding. And I was able to get money from various companies, but they tend to fund small amounts, and it was very frustrating. There was not enough to do a decent program. So I told the dean that I will create a national center called Power Semiconductor Research Center. And so I went around the nation to the 5 or 6 power device companies and went on a begging tour, as we say, right? So I say that I have trousers with holes in them because of begging people for money. So I would go to these companies and they would let me in to the first level, second level management. And they would say, yeah, we fund university. I can give you maybe 10K, 20K. So with 5 companies, 20K, it's 100K. And MCNC wanted 65K to just do one run of devices. I said, that's not going to cut it. So I went back to the department head and the dean. I said, can I go outside the US? And that was something quite new at that time at NC State. They had no internationally funded centers, to my knowledge. So they were very skeptical, but I said, okay, then you need to, so I said, I need to put together a licensing agreement. So give me a lawyer and I'll write that and we'll work out some terms and conditions. They said, no, we don't have resources to give you a lawyer. Go around, talk to other directors of centers, get their agreements and put something together. So I went around and I found not one center director had agreements that included intellectual property. That came as a real surprise to me. And I'm sorry, this is the culture at that time, not the present culture. So I said, I have to create these intellectual property clauses. So I created a tiered membership with associate members paying 25K, members paying 100K, and senior members paying 150K. And all these other centers had membership mostly with money coming from NSF or some other government agency, and then supplemented by industry fundings of 10 or 20K per year. So that was astoundingly large numbers from the management point of view here, and that's with a lot of skepticism, but they said, yeah, if you can pull it off, why not? We were not going to stand in your way. So I had to give a presentation in Japan, so I said, this is my opportunity to talk to those big companies there that are manufacturing power devices, including my invention, the IGBT. So I went around, and it was like night and day. Over there, I was considered the great sensei, the man who created the IGBT and all the things. So they took me right up to the president and board of directors, and when I make my presentation, they said, yes, we would love to support you, and yeah, we're happy to come in at 150K. So I came back, and I had about 500K, and then after other people got wind, they all started joining. So we ended up with about 700K per year, which is a decent amount of money, and so this center got started. I'll tell you a little bit more about it a little later, but that's what it takes sometimes to do the kind of research you want to do. So next, screen is a little small, so let me see what I'm looking at. Okay, so next thing I did was to then, what have I got here? Yeah, my startup company, so I'll tell you about that because that was an offshoot of the work done at PSRC. And then we'll talk a little bit about the FREEDM Center as well as PowerAmerica. So out of all this work at NC State, a lot of innovations were created, which are listed here. I will not go through them because I will be talking about them in subsequent slides, but I thought it would be interesting for you to see which of all these things on this slide have been commercialized. So firstly, everything I did at RPI has been commercialized, which is very interesting because they were very impactful. In fact, as I said, MOCVD is now the dominant technology. Most things at GE, of course, were commercialized. We were in the business of doing things for commercial purposes. There were some theoretical things that I did which are important, but so they're not commercialized. But surprisingly, maybe to you, most of the things at NC State have been commercialized. But that took a lot of work, and that's through my startup companies, et cetera. So I'll tell you how there are various models that can make that happen. All right, so with that, I'll turn to a slide which covers about 25 years of time frame where the industry has been searching for what I would call an ideal power switch. So this ideal power switch has to have the features given at the bottom of the chart. So what we're trying to do is to take energy from a source like the 120 volts AC power coming from the socket and feed it into an application like your air conditioner and make it run efficiently. So to do that, there are switches inside the circuits that switch on and off and regulate the power. And these switches should not dissipate any energy because that's wasted and reduces efficiency. So they have to have the first point, which is low on-state voltage drop. They also have to have high switching speed to reduce switching losses. In addition, they have to work at what we call high on-state current density because then we can make small chips, which are low in cost for these applications. We need switches that are very robust so that they don't need a lot of ancillary protection circuits, which cost a lot of money and reduce efficiency. And then they need to be voltage controlled. Now, for that, you have to understand some history, which I'll give you in a minute, because the first devices were not voltage controlled, they were current controlled. And then they should preferably work at high temperatures, because that opens up a lot more applications that I'll talk about. All right, so historically, the first power device was made in the 1950s. This is a bipolar transistor, which is an offshoot of the Nobel Prize winning work done at Bell Labs, right, on the BJT. We're just commemorating the 75th anniversary of the transistor invention this year. So in the case of power, Bell Labs wasn't interested in power, so companies like GE and Westinghouse picked that up and made the structure shown here. So this is a bipolar device which relies on electron transport, and it uses a narrow P-base region to get the gain. To run this transistor, we supply a current through the base terminal, and it then produces current from the emitter to the collector. But the gain of this transistor at that time was, even in spite of the structure, was not great. It was about 10. So imagine you're running a motor, you need 100 amps. You have to supply 10 amps into the base, sometimes even 20 or 30 amps to switch it. And that was could not be done in a small circuit. So there were big boards, and then this device had all kinds of failure modes, so they had to put some circuitry around it to protect it. So people were not happy with this. In the West Coast, people came up with an alternative, which is the power MOSFET. This is an offshoot of the CMOS technology. So it uses a MOS structure, which is shown at the top of the device with a gate and the yellow oxide. And that device was commercialized by companies like Siliconics and International Rectifier. This device is based on surface transport of electrons under the gate, and then bulk transport of electrons through the rest of the regions. So these are two very differing technologies, and they can be summarized with a Rudyard Kipling quote, which is east and west is west, never the twain shall meet. So that was the feeling at that time, because there were East Coast companies like GE and Westinghouse making bipolar devices, West Coast companies, as I said, like International Rectifier building MOSFETs. They had their own different kind of processing facilities, they had their own end customers, and the general feeling was they are not compatible. So I did something radical. I said, I'm going to combine the physics of these two devices and create something new, and that is the IGBT. So this structure of the IGBT, which is actually a simplified structure to illustrate the principles, but it relies on using electron transport through the gate and then hole transport through a wide-base PNP transistor. So when I proposed this, my colleagues at GE were greatly skeptical. They said, this is just not going to work. So it reminded me of a quote from Arthur C. Clarke. I'm sure you've heard of him. He collaborated to make the movie 2001: Space Odyssey, but he has many other accomplishments. But he said, when you propose something, the first thing people will say is impossible, it won't work. Then when you show it works, they'll say, oh, we don't really need it, we'll just make what we have better. And then when it finally works, they said, oh yeah, I thought of it all along, it was my idea. So I experienced all of that. So I'll just tell you that first they said it won't work. Why? Because this device has 4 layers, N, P, N, and P, 4 layers. And that's known in our parlance as a thyristor. And they said, this thyristor will latch up, and you will lose gate control. It'll just blow up. It's not going to work. So then I said, I know how to fix that. I'll prevent that from happening. Then they said, yeah, but you're proposing a terrible device. We know that the prevailing wisdom is to build a narrow base electron transport device, and you're proposing a wide base hole transport device, the worst thing you can do. So it'll hardly carry any current, and you'll not get any working devices. So I said, you are not modeling this correctly. I have my own model for this. It's called today the PIN MOSFET model, which is in my books, and everybody accepts it now. And with that, I can get high on-state current density, and it'll work well. I said, all right, okay, maybe it'll work. But then you have no way to control the switching speed. The switching speed was controlled in bipolar transistors with what we call lifetime control. And they said, if we know that if we apply that to MOSFETs, you completely degrade the gate oxide, and it doesn't work. So there's no way to control speed. So it may be good for some low frequency users, but it's not really good for general purpose. So I had to actually come up with a process that allowed me to control the switching speed of this device without damaging the gate. And without that, we would not have the devices we have today. So when you think about an innovation, it's not enough to just create a structure, and maybe you can get a patent on this. You can say that of these layers. There are many other things involved that are required to be accomplished to make it a successful innovation. So that's my point. But one more important thing that is important for me to convey is that to take this from a concept to a product takes a lot of time and effort. So in our semiconductor business, at least at GE in those days, if you had a new device, you would spend 2 or 3 years in the research lab trying to make the device, set up the process, and test it out. And after you work it all out and it looks really good, then you go to the upper management and say, okay, now I think it's time to make a product out of this. So you go to your production people and say, would you like to build this device? It could make a really nice device in the market, it has lots of applications. And they say, yeah, but we need to spend $10 million to buy this equipment because you have a new device with a new process. We'll have to take 2 years to set up all that, and finally you get your product. So what does it take? About 5 years, okay? I didn't want to do that. I wanted to go from my idea to a production device in a very short time. So I recognized, and you will too, if you look at the picture, the upper part of my device is just like the MOSFET. So I said, they're making that, so if I can go to them and tell them to build my device, I'll get them the new material with a P+ collector, and we should be able to make it. But if you walk into a production facility and say you want to make a research device, even at GE in the same company, they say, no, we are busy making product. We don't even know if your idea works, so we're not going to bother with doing it. So I had to then sell it to the GE management. So this was the task that I was, again, very successful with, without which I would not have the products we have today. So firstly, I had to convince a manager of a division that was starting up to build adjustable speed drives that are now commonly used to run your air conditioners at home and in the industry as well. So he was trying to use bipolar transistors, and they were not working. He was very frustrated, and he actually came to the labs. And he was a lot of four-letter words, to be honest. I had not heard that before. And he said, you guys are sitting in this ivory tower, just twiddling your thumbs, reading some papers. Why don't you do something useful? Otherwise, I'll tell the chairman to can all of you. So I said, oh, better come up with something fast. So I had this idea, so I told my colleagues, you don't have anything better, so let me pitch this to him. And we said yes, and it can be used more than his adjustable speed drives, in lighting, appliance controls, et cetera. So I made a presentation to him, and he said, okay, I'm not going to ask you to be canned, and he went away. And we didn't know what happened, but next thing I know, I'm called by the head of the research department saying, Jack Welch is coming to town next week, and he wants to talk to you. I said, what? Why is the chairman wanting to talk to me? He said, well, he's been told about your device, and you haven't even told me about it. So you better come up to my office and tell me about it. So I had to share that with him and then prepare to give this presentation. So if you know anything about Jack Welch, he was known as Neutron Jack. So why? Because he would go to a division, and if he didn't like what was going on, he would can all the people, and the building was left, like a neutron bomb went off. So he was known as Neutron Jack. So everybody was terrified of him. And they were certainly not going to pitch this device that some young guy had come up with, which had not even been made. They said, no, you got to face him, and we're not going to present this on your behalf. So I had to do that. In 1 hour, I convinced him that this had great merit, and that I also convinced him that I need to make this in the production facility. So his reaction was very positive. He didn't can me. Instead, he said, give him all the support he needs. It has huge impact across the company. However, I'm going to embargo all talk about this because it's too valuable to GE. So we'll never release a product. We'll just cash in on it and make all these lamps and everything else based on it and make them much better than our competitors. So that was the good news and the bad news. So bad news was I couldn't get credit for it early because he didn't want it spoken about. But the good news was now I could go to the production facilities and say, you need to make my device, or you need to ask Jack Welch. And they said, no, I don't want to talk to Jack Welch. We'll make it for you. So I carefully designed this device, and looking back, I realized that there was a huge spotlight on me from the very top of the company. And if I had tripped up anywhere, there were all these people, naysayers, who were saying, it's not going to work. So I had all this pressure, which I realized, of course. But fortunately, I did a flawless mass design and process, and the very first wafers came out with everything working. And now we had huge quantities of devices coming out of the production line. I could control them, tailor them for various frequencies, and give them to engineers at GE, and they just went bananas. They had never seen a device that worked this well before. So I would have people run into my office and say, today, I ironed a shirt with your device in the steam iron. I said, what? The steam iron has no heat sink. The device needs heat sink. No, it's still running in the steam iron happily. I said, wow, okay, not bad. It has high temperature capability. So those are exciting days, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that. But basically, this exploded into lots of applications at GE, and eventually, in 1983, by a set of weird circumstances, which I won't go into, it became released as a product by GE in 1983. And there's a data sheet and everything, and talks that we publicized this in various magazines. But after that, it got very good press around the world, right? I mean, once you release this. So the Japanese companies picked up on this and came out with IGBT products in about 1985 and beyond. And then the European and US companies, other US companies as well. All right, so today the IGBT is used pervasively, as Dr. Vouk mentioned. So in the consumer sector, you will find them in a lot of places in your house, like those I've shown here: washing machines, microwave ovens, flat top cooktops, all your small appliances, even your vacuum cleaner if you like to do vacuuming. It's used extensively in transportation. I'll talk about that more. It's used very much in the medical sector. I'll just show a very few examples of that. It's even used in the financial sector because you need to have very good power stability for transactions on your credit cards and elsewhere. So the UPS systems all use IGBTs. It's used extensively in lighting, which I'll talk about, industrial sector, very briefly. And then it's a absolutely required device for all our renewable energy. So I want to talk about that. So I documented all of this in a book I published in 2015. It has about 700 pages, of which 400 pages are just on the applications. And it covers a broad spectrum of things. And to my surprise, this book won an award. None of my books had ever won an award. I didn't even know there were awards for books. So the publisher was very excited. They said, this is a very difficult award to get, and we were excited. So I said, okay, it's called the PROSE Award. PROSE does not stand for my excellent English writing. It is an acronym. So I've done a second edition now, which updates even more applications. So I'd like to now show you a chart that I borrowed from Kintish, which shows how the social impact occurs. So he said, to get improved living conditions, you need more goods and services. This chart went a little faster than I wanted. But to do that, you have to use more energy, which results in more carbon dioxide emissions, and that increases the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, which of course has an adverse effect on climate. And then you have a degraded ecosystem. So to solve this, we can do conservation, which is, of course, using less goods and services. I don't think that's very popular politically to tell people stop having air conditioning or stop driving your cars. So I don't think that's very practical. Instead, you have to do it with greater efficiency, and that's what I'm going to talk about in my presentation. And you have to use renewable energy in place of fossil fuels. If you do that, perhaps you don't need to do sequestration or geoengineering, which is like reflecting sunlight in the atmosphere. And finally, of course, failing all that, we're doing what's called adaptation, like building seawalls in Miami to prevent the ocean from rising and coming in. Some islands in the world are even going underwater, so it's a serious problem we have to address. So how can we do something, at least in my limited way, that is to increase energy efficiency? And we use a lot of energy, so it's not a bad area to be doing this. So I'll talk about 3 examples. One is efficient air conditioning, refrigeration. Second is efficient lighting, and third is efficient transportation. So we'll start with transportation. I think you know that transportation uses a lot of fossil fuels, and internal combustion engines, as this chart shows, comprise about 80% of that. So every time you burn 1 gallon of gasoline, it results in 19.4 pounds of carbon dioxide being released in the atmosphere. So this is a huge source of carbon dioxide. So these gasoline-powered cars, of course, have a cylinder where the gas goes, and then you have a spark plug to ignite that gas to propel you. So that was done for a long time using the Kettering ignition system with a mechanical distributor. As you can see in this picture, you get a spark not only at the spark plug, but also inside the distributor. So these were not very precise and would start degrading over time because of the arcing inside the distributor. I'm sure those of you who had cars in the 70s, like I did, recall having to open the hood and do tuning, right? Otherwise, your car would start knocking, or at least your gasoline consumption would start increasing. So that was necessary. Well, all that changed because the IGBT enabled the electronic ignition system. It's the only device that could tolerate the heat into the hood and have the voltage and power capability to do the spark plug. So this became viable in 1989, and according to various documentation and studies, we have gained at least 10% improvement in fuel efficiency. Now, 10% may not look very big, but when you think about how much gasoline we consume, it works out to be enormous numbers. So that's what I'll share with you. Meanwhile, of course, many companies have been building these devices just for this one application, and billions of devices have been sold. So I'll turn to the next area, which is motor drives. Here, 2/3 of the electricity in the world is used to run motors because they're everywhere in your home and factories. So in terms of residences, we use them in refrigerators and heat pumps for air conditioning. In terms of buildings, we use them for vending machines, or I'm sorry, in commercial area, we use them for vending machines, and in buildings, large buildings, as unitary air conditioners. So the old technology that was being used before the IGBT is shown here. So we would take the AC power from the socket and feed it into an induction motor. That's very efficient, more than 95% efficiency. So that part is fine. But if you want to regulate the load, like how fast the fan runs or how much fluid you're pumping in a factory, you need to regulate this. And that was done with dampers. Dampers basically convert that energy into heat. So it's a hugely inefficient way. Efficiency was less than 50%. So this is why the manager at GE wanted to create the adjustable speed drive to improve the efficiency. And for this, you need to convert the input AC power into a variable frequency power to feed to the motor. And that could be finally done by using IGBTs. So now you have IGBT inverters, which are also very efficient, 95%, and you have an induction motor, also 95% efficient, and you can feed the load and adjust the power. So that improved efficiency by a whopping 40%. That's hard to find in any applications. So the first, this is a picture I have of the first IGBT-based ASDs given to me by GE. It shows the IGBT inside as well as the control chip, and you can see it's a tiny control chip running this device as opposed to what I described for the BJTs. And that led to the first commercial adjustable speed drives, which you are beneficiaries of. So the next area is lighting, and lighting consumes about 1/5 of all the electricity in the world, and that's because lighting was created by Edison, right, using the incandescent lamp. That's his great fame. So in this case, the filament is heated to 3,000 degrees C, and most of the energy goes into heat. As you well know, you cannot touch the lamp after you turn it on. Less than 5% is actually used to produce the useful light. The benefits of this are that it's inexpensive, it's kind of considered disposable, but it has also a frustratingly short lifespan. Now we are used to other lamps. So in the 80s, after the IGBT became possible, GE started developing compact fluorescent lamps, which are precursors to the CFLs that finally hit the market. They call them Triad and Haloc, etc. So the challenge here is that you want to put this lamp in the same base as your lamps in your homes, right? You don't want to have to sell a whole lot of new furniture to your customers. You want to let them easily replace the light bulb. So it has to have the same screw-in A-line capability, and then all the electronics has to fit in the small base under the squiggly tube that has the fluorescence. But when you're near the fluorescence, you also get some heat, so this part also gets hot. So you need electronics that's very compact and can take heat, and only the IGBT could do that. So when this became successful, the energy efficiency went up tremendously. So we gained 75% savings in energy in this case. That's enormous. So CFLs certainly became popular, and they also had longer lifespan of 10,000 hours. And the last I counted, 21 billion CFLs have been produced and sold in the world. So they were extensively used until we were waiting for LEDs to come along, right? So now we have LEDs that are cost effective, and most of you, I'm sure, are switching to LEDs, which is good. All right, so I've written a lot of papers about the social impact as well, because I wanted to document this, and I want to thank Dan Stansel, who's here, who encouraged me to do this many, many years ago. And he thought I would write a short thing that we'll put on our website, but I ended up writing a whole book on it. So in this, I've shown that over the 30 years, from 1990 to 2020, the electronic ignition system has saved us almost 1.8 trillion gallons of gasoline. That's the savings, not the consuming part. Okay, and that has saved consumers $7 trillion if you take into account the cost of gas. Adjustable speed drives have saved us 73,000 terawatt hours, saving us about $14.6 trillion because you have to, of course, pay for the electricity, and if you don't use it, then you save money. And the compact fluorescent lamps have done 59.9 terawatt hours of savings with about $12 trillion. These are not billion, but trillion. So in a quick summary, this also benefits the utilities. They don't have to construct coal-fired plants if they don't need to supply this electricity, so they have saved about $4 trillion. And then consumers, by not consuming this gasoline and electricity, have saved $33.6 trillion. That's not bad for one technology. Unfortunately, none of this shows up in my bank account, guys. That's not fair. That's life. All right. Now, in terms of carbon emissions, if you don't consume the gasoline, then you save carbon emissions, same with electricity. So that adds up to 181 trillion pounds. This is, again, an enormous amount, if you think about it. But to give you context, I thought I'd put out a number. If you look at the per capita emissions, which is emissions attributed to each person on Earth, it's about 8,000 pounds. And if you have 7 billion people, then we're talking about 56 trillion pounds of carbon dioxide emissions. So if you divide the two, you see that this the impact over 30 years for IGBTs has been to offset human activity over a 3-year time frame, which is just amazing if you think about it. So because of this, when I was inducted into the Inventors Hall of Fame, an article was written at Forbes where they called me the man with the world's largest negative carbon footprint. Not the smallest carbon, largest negative carbon footprint, okay? And then when they inducted me into the Inventors Hall of Fame, they made me a superhero. That's cool. I don't know how many of you get to become superheroes. Call me Power Man. So when they showed me this cartoon, I said, what does it say? It says, well, you're strapped on these IGBTs on your arms, and you're converting pollution into clean energy. So it's a metaphorical thing, but I think it's very cool. I didn't bring my suit, but I think I look pretty cool in that, yes. All right, so now I'm going to turn to other applications. So in the medical area, the power supplies of all these medical equipment are run by IGBTs, and it's all documented in my book. So next time, hopefully you don't have to use these, but if you have any diagnostics done, you'll hopefully remember that the IGBT is in that machine. But my favorite one is the portable defibrillator. This is something I did not envision the IGBT being used for. And what it does is it is able to handle this 100 kilowatt biphasic shock that has to be given to a victim of cardiac arrest. And it's a 2,000 volt source, so only very few technologies can do this. Of course, actually only the IGBT can do this. So it was enormous to see this deployed. And when they first came out with the defibrillator, they actually called me and said, Professor, did you know that your IGBTs are going to go into these defibrillators, which are going to be commercialized now? So that was very nice to hear. And according to AMA, we might save, I think we are saving over 100,000 lives in the US alone and more around the world. That's an unintended application. So now I want to turn to the transportation sector. The IGBT is the enabling technology, again, to create the hybrid electric and electric cars. The first one, I think, was the Prius, which was released in Japan by Toyota in 1997. The IGBT was used for the electronic ignition system as well as for controlling power from the motor. So that's illustrated in the chart below in various modes, including the regenerative mode, which allows us to improve mileage. So I now drive a Toyota Camry hybrid, so I feel really excited that my IGBTs are taking me around. That's always nice. But it's used in other transportation systems too. Every time you ride a tram or trolley in Europe, it's using IGBTs. All the airport transportation systems use this. But it's also used in high-speed bullet trains, and I've listed an example of 3 cases that I actually experienced myself. So I rode on the Shinkansen, the Sapsan, and the Shanghai Maglev recently. So that's exciting to see. So it's used for mass transit as well. So now, in the interest of time, let me move on to renewable energy sector. This is solar cells. So in the case of a solar cell, you're converting DC power into usable power, which has to be 60 hertz AC. So that's all done with IGBT inverters. And today, solar cells usage has been growing rapidly. This is a little bit old chart, but the growth has exceeded even this. The same is true for wind power. All wind power has to convert variable frequency wind output to a 60 hertz stable power that you can feed into the grid. And that's all done by using IGBT-based inverters. So the IGBT eliminated the gear train, making this much easier to install on top of the nacelle of the wind turbine. And Electronic Design Magazine surprised me with this comment in 2004 that the progress within IGBT technology has made the biggest single contribution to wind turbine advances over the past several decades. I mean, that's amazing to hear. So this, of course, has also been growing rapidly. So wind and solar are the highest growing areas, fortunately for us, to replace fossil fuels. So I think I can keep going. I have still a lot of things to talk about. So let's talk now about leaving GE and coming here. So I already talked about having to found this international consortium. So I was the founding director and also the principal investigator for all the research there. And I did this for 10 years. And it produced lots of reports. I want to acknowledge all these companies that sponsored it. And then we also had some support from other agencies. So during this time, we created a lot of innovations that I had listed previously. So I won't go through them again. But one of the outcomes of this was that with my new innovative patent filing and licensing model that I told you about, I had to create that new licensing agreement, right? So I should tell you that when I created it, I asked the university to have a lawyer check it, and they said, okay. And they came back and said, there is a problem. I said, what's wrong? They said, there's a spelling mistake on page 3. I said, good grief. Give me a law degree. I must have written it perfectly. So anyway, so as a consequence of that, we were successful in getting these companies to sponsor a lot of patent applications. So I ended up with 50 US patents over the 10-year time frame. That is quite a lot, guys. If you have experience trying to get patents, it takes a lot of work to make that happen. So as a consequence, when in about 2000, the university decided it's time that we have a program to commercialize the innovations in the university. So they created something called Academy Funds to invest, a venture capital fund to invest in technologies from NC State and take them to the market. So I guess I had probably the most patents at that point at the universities. So they said, let's go to Baliga and ask him to see if he wants to make some products. So I told them that I'm too busy running my center and I have a lot of funding. I cannot stop that. So if we can try to license one of my ideas in a company called Microohm that we established and get companies to do this under my supervision, and so I'll consult and do that while still working full-time at NC State. So we did that with an innovation called the TMBS rectifier. Interestingly, Vishay Siliconics now says this is the most successful rectifier that they have made in the last 25 years. So it's a pretty nice innovation. Then they came back and said, that licensing model is not fun for us as VCs. We need to create a company and take it public and go IPO and do all the fun things. So I said, okay, that sounds exciting. So they said, what idea would you like to use? I said, power devices are not the best thing because we sell them for a very low price. That's the way the industry works. High volume, low price, low margins. I said, I don't really think a startup can be successful in that. So I looked around and I found that in the wireless space, they pay a lot of money. Instead of $1 a piece, they pay $100 or $200 for a transistor. And the margins are much bigger, like 40, 50, 60%. And the big gorilla in that was Motorola. They were building something called LDMOS, which is in the base stations, and they had 80% of the market. Now that device had a fundamental flaw. It was based on something, physics that we teach all our students because that's the well-known physics for the last 50 years. And that produces a distortion, a fundamental nonlinearity. So to suppress this nonlinearity, people would buy an amplifier for $1,000 and spend $2,000 for a feed-forward amplifier to remove the distortion. Because if they didn't do that, they would create IMD products that would go into sidebands, and they had only licensed this much spectrum. A sideband, for example, Sprint may have the spectrum. Lucent would be sitting here, and if your signal came to Lucent, they would get mad and have FCC shut you down, right? So this was essential. They had to do this. So I said, maybe I can make a device which is super linear. As I said, nobody had done this in the last 50 years. So, but somehow I came up with a way to do it in terms of the physics. Then I had to figure out how to make a practical structure that would exhibit this. And then I said, hey, somebody must have done this already. I looked everywhere. Nobody had published anything on it. So I applied for patents, and they've all been given to me. So I think that's another very cool thing to do, to discover a new mode in which transistors work after people have worked on it for decades. Anyway, this, so I told the VCs, that's something worth doing, but I need to have a partner to build this and a facility where we can build this. So one of my sponsors at PSRC was Fairchild, and they did not have a business here, so I thought maybe they would like to challenge Motorola. And I said, let's pitch this to their vice president. So I gave a 1-hour presentation to this president about this, and he gave us $10 million. Not bad. Of course, this rests on 30 years of work before that to build a reputation, right? You don't walk in and get a 10 million for a 1-hour presentation. So that was fun. We spent several years building this, and the very first devices also worked. I worked with their Salt Lake facility with 10 people there, and it was very challenging, let me tell you. I'm sure those who want to start companies know this, but I was doing this alone, not had any, I don't use graduate students in any of this, by the way. I believe in a strict, what should I say, barrier between what I do at the university and what I do in my startups. So I was doing this alone, so Fairchild put a lot of milestones before they would give us the money, so I had to work on hitting those milestones. Meanwhile, we were frantically trying to hire people into the company, and we finally built it up to about 40 employees. So it was very hectic. So at that point, I told the university I have to step away from my research. So I left on leave for about 2 or 3 years. So that was successful, and this chart shows the data sheet that came out, and it was very exciting, and Fairchild eventually acquired that. Okay, then the VC said, you want to do anything else? And I said, yes, I have this additional idea. I've come up with a new way to build what are called sync and control FETs for voltage regulator modules. These are used to power all your computers, your microprocessors and memory chips. And I said, I have a better way to do this, and we can build this in foundries in the US. So they said, let's do it. And within 6 months, we had working devices. And we gave them to Intel, because Intel makes the largest number of microprocessors, right? And they check these out. They build these and test them. And then if the stuff works, they give you a design win, and they give it to all the power supply manufacturers. They then build it for the computers. So we had to first win them over, and we did. They did tests. In fact, it took them twice as long as we expected. And when we asked them why, they said it was so good the first time, we couldn't believe the results. So we tested everything second time, and it came out. So we are going to give you this design value. You are like 2 or 3 years ahead of the competitors. Now, these are big companies we're competing with, like Hitachi and Motorola and others. So that was exciting, and we got this product running. And then we said, let's grow this company. I thought we could have a $1 billion company. But we had to go to the next phase, which is to raise more money to do what is called QualRel. You have to qualify your products, and only then the customers will buy it. And to our surprise, my surprise, none of the VCs in the Southeast would do that, willing to come up with that. We went to the West Coast, they wouldn't do it. So eventually we said, okay, we need to, they thought we were a small company, couldn't compete and grow to a big company. I thought that's what the risk-taking is all about. But anyway, they didn't do it. So we decided to license it, and we licensed it to Linear Technologies, who makes the control chip for these. So they sell a combination of this, and now they're making $150 million a year. So we could have been what do you say? We could have been a contender. Is that what, what was said in the movie? All right. So that was frustrating, but at least the product was successful. So after that, I wanted to commercialize another innovation called the split-gate MOSFET. I did that through another company called Giant Semiconductor. This is based on a very novel 2D charge coupling concept that I proposed, but once again, it's good to propose a theory, but you have to make practical structures. So here I made a deal with Alpha and Omega Corporation, where we licensed it to them, and they were able to successfully manufacture it. So I want to tell you a little bit more about this because this has become another big successful product like the IGBT. The structure is shown here. It contains a deep source electrode in a deep trench, which does the charge coupling, which I won't go into the physics. It's in my books. And then by doing that, you get the result that you move from the blue line to the red line in terms of the on resistance, which is the main thing the industry wants to do. So to put this in context, here are where current products are with the 1D standard device, and here's what Alpha and Omega got when they started building these devices. So you can see that across the entire voltage range, these products are much better, and now they have become the dominant product. All the companies have picked up this idea and are manufacturing it. All right, so after that, I decided, yes, I didn't make $1 billion, so I should come back to the university and keep working. So I came back and worked with a group of faculty to create the FREEDM System Center. This is an NSF-sponsored ERC, and it took a couple of years to win this proposal, but it ran for 10 years. And of course, it involved a lot of faculty, not just myself. On this center, I served as a thrust leader for 10 years. That's circled in this diagram, produced lots of reports and graduated 5 PhD students. The goal of this center was to create a microgrid concept where we could insert applications like your home and energy storage elements as well as energy generation elements like renewable energy sources and make it a plug-and-play system. So that required developing something called a solid-state transformer, and then we wanted to make this a resilient system, meaning if there's a failure in part of the network, we could isolate it easily, and that was done with the fault interruption devices. So this is now working at utility scale, we call it, and it needs very high voltage devices, which I've listed here, which we successfully made. But those are silicon carbide devices, so to tell you about that, I have to reach back a few years, and I know this is taking quite a bit of time, but I think we have enough time. Is that okay? Okay. 5 minutes, okay. Go faster. No, I won't go faster. Maybe I won't tell you about my latest innovation. But this is an important one. It's called wide bandgap semiconductor power devices. So to give you the history behind this, in 1979, it was interesting that people were quite happy building power devices out of silicon, and nobody seemed to have bothered to ask the question, what happens if we replace silicon with some other material? So I happened to have that kind of intellectual curiosity, so I sat down and wrote out a theory for what happens. And I came up with this equation on this chart, which is Ron specific, which is the resistance of the device equals 4 BV squared divided by epsilon mu EG cubed. Now at that time, we did not know the breakdown strength EC, so we used EG, the band gap. And according to this equation, if you increase EG, you get lower Ron, as I think is obvious from the equation. And that's why we needed wide band gap. Wide band gap means larger EG. And today you know this because it's become very popular. We have PowerAmerica because of it. And recently we just won a huge DoD program because of it. So this is the foundation of all of that. So the true equation is given on the right-hand side, and the denominator is now known with my name. It's called Baliga's figure of merit. And interestingly, that equation can translate into 4 BV squared divided by Ron specific. So today people build devices, measure the BV, measure the Ron, and calculate this and see how close they're coming to what I've given as a theoretical limit, meaning the best thing you can do. And they say, we're getting close. So one of the interesting things that's happening, I'll show you in the next slide, is people are now publishing papers, and curiously it has my name in the title with Baliga's figure of merit. So I have a question for you. If my name appears right next to the authors, should I count this as my publication? I haven't been doing it, but I'm not sure many of you have this conundrum. All right, anyway. So what does this do? So first of all, you can take a MOSFET and compute its resistance. And I won't go into the details. These are in my textbook. So you can see here that we can go from silicon to silicon carbide, and for the same breakdown voltage, which is needed for an application, we can improve things by 1,000-fold. That's enormous. If in our technology, if you improve things 2 or 3 times, you get excited and go out and invest. This is 1,000-fold. So once I announced this, a lot of investment went into this, as you might know, over the years, funding CREE and so many other organizations. And we, over now, I guess, 30 years, yeah, we spent 30 years developing the technology because it was tough to make the material, but it was worth it because of this improvement. All right, but there was one fundamental, not one, but major roadblocks, several major roadblocks. One was reach-through breakdown, gate oxide failure, low inversion channel mobility, high threshold voltage. So all these had to be solved, and I have a patent that does this beautifully. It's shown here. So in the interest of time, I won't go into it, but we did demonstrate practical devices in '97, and this is the structure now used by companies like CREE and others to build devices. So here's a chart showing state-of-the-art by Dr. Palmer from CREE in 2014 at IEDM, and he showed the triangles that demonstrate that for higher breakdown voltages, like 10,000 volts, we are very close to the ideal limit, but at lower voltages, we are not as close, and further work can be done to improve it. So where are these going to be used? Basically where IGBTs are being used as shown here. And if you replace the IGBTs, you could get even higher efficiency. So that's the area that people are exploring. The problem is that the cost of silicon carbide is much higher than silicon IGBTs, and so it's not that easy to say I'm going to replace it because end customers will not be happy. So what is the basic approach? It is to create system-level benefits. And you can do that by increasing the operating frequency, which then allows you to make smaller passive elements and save costs. So that has been shown to be true. So of course, the PowerAmerica Institute was created to make this happen, and many companies joined us in this proposal, which we fortunately won. So that's a $140 million program that ran for 5 years to drive down the cost of manufacturing. So I just want to say that I had a number of roles in this. One of this was to create what I call the national process. The reason was there are many companies who were not familiar with how to build silicon carbide devices, and I wanted them to have the ability to go into the foundry, and we could do that with my process. So this shows the excellent statistics for the process, and some companies have licensed this. Then I wanted to improve the high-frequency capability of these devices. So to give you, again, some background, at PowerAmerica, they created a roadmap, and industry said we would improve this high-frequency capability by 10% every year. That's good progress. So we built these innovative structures, and we got 400% increase just in one shot. Okay, that just shows you the impact of doing something new. And this could be built with the same process. So that's the beauty of this idea. There's another idea I proposed, which I have patented, the cell structure that does the same thing with about a 2 times improvement, and you can combine this with the previous chart to get even better performance. So that will lead us to better devices for electric vehicles in the power control unit, and according to Toyota, going back to 2014, they think they can shrink the power control unit by 1/2 to 1/3 and improve the efficiency by 68%, giving you more range. So all the electric vehicle manufacturers now have committed to building electric vehicles. Automobile manufacturers have committed to building electric vehicles. Most of them are done using silicon IGBTs, but some high-performance cars are now using silicon carbide. I believe Tesla is using them. So if we replace all gasoline-powered vehicles with electric vehicles, we could reduce about 12 trillion pounds of carbon dioxide emissions. That's an impressive target. If you do the same thing in terms of electricity use, we use about 26,000 terawatt hours of electricity in the world. 68% comes from fossil fuels. If you replace that all with renewable sources, you could reduce 19 trillion pounds of emissions. So there is hope that we can do better, but a lot of investment has to be done in order to make this happen. And then I had a last item, which I won't do because of time. This is the holy grail of power electronics. So you won't get to hear about the holy grail. according to Professor Bhattacharya, this is what they've been waiting for, and I've created a device that does that. So instead of a kludge of devices, now we have a single device that does this function, and we made this successfully with the DOE CETO program for 3 years. And I'll quickly run through this and just say that we actually built a solar inverter based on this successfully, and DOE was extremely excited and happy with this. All right, so here's my conclusion. So I've done a lot of innovative things, and I've shared with you some of the challenges in making that happen and how I was able to do it. And let me just say, if you do it right, then people recognize you. That's good, fortunately. So I've got a lot of IEEE awards, other awards like were mentioned by Dr. Vouk, and then NCSU, of course. So last, I want to acknowledge the support I've received from GE, of course, at the beginning, all the NCSU sponsors, and then my 40-plus graduate students who helped me during these years. So thank you all for your attention. Appreciate your time.
So it's a pleasure and a privilege, to say it again, to tell you how we are doing. As I said, it's very hard to follow Jay at this point in time, but I'll try to give you a glimpse at some of the things we do and do really well. First of all, I would like to say everybody who is at NC State in the research business, whether you are faculty or staff or students, you should pat yourself on the back, because last several years have been really good, and we have been growing really well. And if you look at this slide, we're really the most recent available. National Science Foundation collects the data, but they're about a year and a half behind in terms of publishing it. So the statistics I'm going to give you are probably about a year behind. 583 million in expenditures, very close to 600 million, which is very good for us. You write proposals, 1.5 to 1.6 billion a year, which is amazing. And what we get back in awards is close to 500 million. So obviously there are other sources of funding that would produce the 600 million in expenditures. And then through the amazing work of our commercialization unit that's sitting there, are you all at the same table? We have produced 18 startups, and some of them are doing really well. These are fiscal year 21 rankings, but the new rankings will not show up until about January, but we'll be doing equally well. One of the things that didn't happen over the last 10, 15 years is the number of faculty didn't grow as fast as we might have expected. It hangs around maybe 15 to 1,800 other researchers. And so we are competing, in fact, with groups of faculty in other institutions, at least, who are considered our peers, who are really larger in numbers, and they seem to be doing well. And also, most of our peers have medical schools, which again is an advantage. But even despite that, if you look at what we do, that we are really top 10 in total research expenditures among universities without medical schools. Third in USDA, it's amazing. 14th, 10th to 14th in DOE expenditures. And when you look at the businesses funding our research, we're in the top 10 to 20 all the time. So, and continuously in top 10 nationwide in research commercialization. So this is really an amazing achievement, I think, and it's really thanks to both the faculty and the research staff and the commercialization unit, and of course, everybody else who participates in research. And this is a 10-plus year picture of how we are growing, and we are growing steadily. It's not that we go down. We occasionally have a little bit of a delay if the government has things like shutdown and so on going on, because it impacts what money we might be able to get. But our federal funding, which is the largest part, it's the blue bar in the lower graph, is growing, and is growing well. In fact, it's $250 million in FY22. And this year, we're actually doing really well in terms of incoming awards and proposals going out. So I expect this to be a really good year as well. And this is fantastic. The question is, can we keep up with it? So far we have, but thanks to everybody who is in the research business at NC State, we seem to be doing well. This is just a glimpse, and actually this is FY21 data. The number is 250 million for FY22, but we are well positioned with respect to the rest of the universities in the country. We are third in USDA funding. All these numbers, by the way, are there, will be larger, or are larger actually in the FY22. We are doing actually really well with respect to NSF funding, particularly with respect to our peers, and DOE funding. And even in the funding for Health and Human Services, which is basically NIH. And I'm actually really happy that it looks like what it looks like, because our life sciences researchers are doing really well. And it's a very steep growth, and we are hoping that, in fact, are very competitive in that space. Hope to be more competitive. Now, you can classify the research in many ways. This particular classification is sort of focusing on impact, and as we have heard from Jay, a lot of stuff, in fact, most of the stuff that he has done has direct impact on the humans just who are using the devices, and has social implications. In creating safe and secure environments is one thing that we do really well. And there's an example, I have sprinkled around the whole thing. Can you see the pointer? Yeah, you can see the pointer. Some of the centers that are active, we have about 45 centers, and they're all busy doing good things. And of course, there are departments and colleges, they're all doing really well. But for instance, there is a Secure Computing Institute, Genetic Engineering in Society out of Shas, which is doing quite well. In fact, they are part of ERC, which is led by Duke, but it's also involved Chapel Hill and us, and it has to do with microbiome. And then we have, we design healthy and resilient societies. For instance, there is a study, going the wrong way. There's a study, Southern Liver Health study out of the sciences. We have Assist and Icons, which is a up-and-coming institute that's focused on a variety of sensors, which is really important. We have quantum computing and quantum sort of applications that are growing. We have sort of pharmaceutical processes that we look at. That's Nimble, that's another manufacturing center. Laboratory for Analytics Sciences is one of the mainstays of the harnessing data for decision making, but so is Geospatial Analytics out of CNR, Data Science Academy, and a few others like this. And a lot of what we do has to do with food and water and energy solutions, and obviously PowerAmerica is one of them. In fact, PowerAmerica has just been renewed at $64 million. $32 million is actual funding from DOE. The other $32 million is matching. STEPS, which is an STC, Science and Technology Center, that's focused on phosphorus renewability or phosphorus management. And it's a combined effort by both College of Ag and Life Sciences and Engineering. And Plant Sciences is a really important focus or source of new projects and management of the agriculture for North Carolina, which the largest industry here is still agriculture. Jay mentioned Microelectronics Commons, which is the new $100 million project that we just received. That's John Muth and Fred Kish and others, which is an amazing thing. And it all has to do with the CHIPS Act, and it has to do with the long years that NC State and the NC State researchers like Jay have been investing into semiconductors at NC State and the wide bandgap semiconductor work, which is amazing. So, and then there is an entity called Novo Nordisk, which we have a really good relationship with, which has been investing into NC State to try and improve on things that have to do with life sciences and microbiome, for instance, in one case, and improved processes and so on. And then there's a whole group of researchers that work in the space of what we call enriching the human experience, things like better teaching using AI, or teaching or helping industrial workforce learn about AI. That's the AI Academy, the Belk Center, which is an amazing entity, and so on. So I'm not covering everything. I really just wanted to point out. And it's possible to reclassify this, the whole thing, by departments and colleges and so on. AI is one of the focal points, and I just want to briefly mention that we are doing quite well. We cover a very broad waterfront on this one, from personalized instruction and training, things like just mentioned AI Institute, AI Academy, Data Science Academy. And academies, by the way, can be real research accelerators because they sort of cover the whole NC State space. They're light on bureaucracy, if you like, and they're focused more on trying to connect people and use interdisciplinary tools to improve and further the research, which otherwise might not happen if it weren't for the interdisciplinary components. I call them research and discovery accelerators. Things like chemistry and materials discovery, we have just received funding that involves looking at hypersonic materials and ceramics. That is an $8 million, $8.5 million grant from DoD that is being handled by material sciences. Again, something that we do really well. And then there's AI in agriculture, which is something that's absolutely, we need to be in that space, and we are in that space and really doing well. But one of the interesting components there is that we are starting, or it has been going on for some time, but faculty in CALS are really trying to start an effort or boost an effort to be more prominent on alternative proteins, things that you can eat that look like proteins and feel like proteins, but are not necessarily, do not necessarily come from live animals. And I think for the future and for management of the actually global warming, it is an important research area. There are other efforts in the AI, and we will come back to that next time, but we are very much ramping up, and we feel that we have as much impact as many others in this space. There's a whole collection of additional efforts, and I can spend the rest of the day going through these things, but I'm listing them here. If you cast your eyes over this, it'll help focus maybe on something that you're interested in. But advanced manufacturing is one of the big ones. Cybersecurity and global health, particularly where it comes to antimicrobial resistance and food security and so on. And we have actually a new academy which is about global health. Again, I'd like to focus on what research commercialization does. Again, that table there, it can pat itself on the back. You did a fantastic job, but of course, also did the faculty who have filed the disclosures and have had the patience to go through the process and have had the fantastic ideas that can be turned into startups or into licenses. We are number one in active license options, at least we have been last time I looked at the tables. We have been number 4 in startups launched. We're not competing with medical schools. We are really just looking at data for universities that do not have medical schools. And we have a number of license agreements, which is quite competitive. And in general, we have been, there's a study that came out beginning of this year and early last year that really ranks us way up in terms of research commercialization. So congratulations to the researchers and congratulations to the research commercialization staff. This is an example. I don't know, when I saw this slide, or at least the title of this hoofprint biome, I don't know for what reason I keep thinking of that Christmas song where grandma, but anyway, it's a startup that is really doing something that's the real problem for essentially for cattle industry, and because cows will produce a lot of methane and a lot of greenhouse gases, if you like. And if you can feed them the right probiotics and somehow turn that methane into something else, that would really help. And in fact, one cow can really sort of provide a lot of agriculture generated methane. And this particular startup has figured out a way of doing that, of really turning that methane off, and at the same time benefiting the cows. So this looks very promising. This is one of more recent startups, which has actually been supported through something that we called Chancellor's Innovation Fund. In part, it has other sources of money, but this is one of the sources of funding which we have, which takes us from a research table to actually something that can be commercialized. In reality, it takes us to what they call the valley of death, and it helps. But there are others. One, for instance, is called Locus Biosciences, which is looking into alternatives to antibiotics, basically, or a way of customizing drugs, if you like, or drugs that you can use when somebody is not being helped by the antibiotics. Because antimicrobial resistance is growing, and it's a continuous problem. And one of the contributors to this, Dr. Rodolfo Barangou, who is being inducted into the National Hall of Fame for Inventors. But when is it? Next week? Yeah. Which is fantastic because he's developed the CRISPR technology that can do some amazing things. And this is, again, something that shows that NC State researchers really are up there and definitely very, very competitive nationally. This is just a snapshot of Chancellor's Innovation Fund over the recent 10 years or so. The competition is about once a year. About half of the projects tend to be life sciences and the other half physical sciences, and some are software. And it is an amazing tool for actually pushing a startup from being just a thought to something that's actually potentially viable and out there. We also have something that I hope a lot of you use, which are shared core facilities. Shared core facilities and seed funding is something that is necessary to bootstrap some research projects, help some of the research projects which have not perhaps received any funding yet to actually move ahead, or those that have the thought of a startup or the beginnings of a startup to move somewhere else. And they have some amazing return on investment. The GRIP, for instance, is at least a factor of 10 for some of those. And there are some that are university-wide, and then there are some that are very specific to an entity like Data Science Academy, for instance, or ICONS has some seed funding. So if you're interested, you should take a look at this and avail yourself of the facilities. In fact, a lot of the successes that we have come from the instrumentation that we have in, for instance, analytics instrumentation facility or genomics science laboratory and so on. So if you have time, please do come, because it is an amazing collection of pieces of equipment, and they really do help researchers move along. It's very expensive equipment as well that a single person would really have a hard time owning and managing. And more recent addition to this is high performance computing, and that facility is currently being revised and hopefully improved. So an example of a seed funding, which is a somewhat new direction, is GRIP EAO, which is really focused, and which means game-changing research incentive program. But this one is focused on economic access and opportunity, something that we haven't done before, but I think it's really good. And it will actually have a similar impact, I suspect, as the GRIPs that ran before, because GRIP was behind, there is behind the PSI in some extent, and then some of the more recent things like STC actually, and other similar large projects have benefited by getting a grip and then being able to produce enough data to get large amounts of money, and by large I mean 20 million and up from agencies. I will go very quickly through this to make sure we are on time, but CLAWS is what was mentioned before by Jay, the microelectronic commons. This is 40 million that we already have, and there's another 60 million coming that really is focused on wide bandgap semiconductors, and it's trying to commercialize some of the wide bandgap semiconductor activity, something that isn't quite yet there. And it's broader than the PowerAmerica, which also has just received a renewal. So those are fantastic projects. PowerAmerica already mentioned several times, and but an interesting project which you should look into if you happen to have a lot of chores that you have to do in the lab repeatedly over and over again. And this is using robots to run the experiments without necessarily human presence. That is being done by several groups, but one group is Integrative Sciences Initiative. There is another group, Carbon Cluster, that is doing that. And it's an amazing collection of robots and arms moving around and other things going around that essentially you can leave it overnight and come back in the morning and get a tenfold increase in productivity. So still experimental, but one of them, the Integrative Sciences part, was funded by the Research Opportunities Initiative out of the System Office. And of course, National Science Foundation is quite interested in this. The other area that we're trying to ramp up is biomanufacturing, because it is very important. It has to do with things that BTech does already now, but it's not, but it needs to grow because the workforce that's needed to do biopharmaceuticals in the state and in the country is lacking in terms of numbers. And then there are some other interdisciplinary activities under something that's called NC-Viral, which is essentially new protocols using viruses to deliver cures, if you like, or mechanisms. Plant sciences I already mentioned, and you will, when you are in plant sciences tomorrow, if you go there, you should take a walk in the whole building. It really is an amazing structure. I always wanted an office on the top of the building because they have greenhouses there. It's so light. But you should really take a walk if you have time. This is the precision microbiome, which I mentioned earlier. It's really an engineering research center for precision microbiome engineering. Microbiome is apparently something that we all have to have the right mixture of in our gut, otherwise we don't do well. But also that is true for plants, and they as well have to have a certain microbiome around them, and this is what Novo Nordisk is is exploring. So this is a very interesting project. You can look it up. Of course, it's on the web. And it is coming out of SHAS. Dr. Kuzma is our PI for NC State is Dr. Kuzma. She's out of SHAS. This is the Novo Nordisk part of the microbiome, led by cows. But there is the other part which has to do with, and NNF is confusing. I always keep thinking of NNF in the, that has to do with chips and things like that, but it really means Novo Nordisk Foundation. So we have to be careful with these terms. I don't know what these things are. These feet? I tried to figure it out. Genevieve, what are these things? It looks to me like lizard feet, but I'm not sure. I had for a while, I had a lizard in my office that would come out every so often. I think the maintenance poisoned him, but I'm not sure. But Integrative Sciences Initiative is the one that's trying to do a lot of interesting things, and one is automation of some of the chemistry of life, molecule discovery. Global One Health Academy is the most recent one that I mentioned, and it really is, they're really focused on trying to understand how the mixture of animal and human components results in diseases and how to handle that. And that's, of course, very important. It goes, a large component of that is the vet school, of course, and we have one of the top vet schools in the country. And so, but others are involved as well. So I want to wrap up by saying that I think the research and innovation in NC State is definitely world-class. Certainly, Jay's talk proves it, even while we knew it before, but after this, there'll be no doubt. And because we are carefully diversifying our research portfolio to be ahead of the game, but not to be too thinly spread. And we really make an effort to successfully support both disciplinary and interdisciplinary work. And we are investing into infrastructure, including core facilities, and seed funding. And we definitely will continue to grow research commercialization and entrepreneurship activities. And there is an entrepreneurship and innovation program that's focused mostly on undergraduates, and we are trying to make sure that we connect between the two, because it's an important component of educating undergraduates, and that is giving them a glimpse of what the research is like. So with this, I'm going to, these things apparently are these pictures that we used here, which come from a competition. It's the graduate student postdoc graphics in this particular case that has to do with artificial caterpillars, which keep creeping back and forth. I actually haven't seen them. There's only a picture that the student provided. But it is the envisioning research that we run every year. And we get some really wonderful pictures. There's a website you should really try and go to and see what it does. But this impressed me. I need to go and see if they actually work. Thank you.
I'm going to see if we have a question or two from the audience. We're going to flip up our slide that allows you to anonymously submit as well. So if you have your phones out and type in menti, MENTI.com, the numbers, sorry.
You're being used. You're being
We're trying
experimented
things.
with. You know that, right? So
The numbers, if you can't see it at the top of the screen to type in, are 7582753. So you can submit questions. You can also upvote questions. We do have one to start with, Mladen, that is
well,
how...
questions for both Jay and me, right?
Yes, we can do questions for either or, if Jay's up for that. How do I get involved in academies or initiatives? That's one question we had.
Academy, as in, would like to form one, or would you like to be part of one? Be part of one is very easy. Just send a note to whoever is the lead for the academy. Forming one is a little bit more complex. Forming one, academies don't go through me. They go through the provost's office. But it really has to be an initiative that a large number of people in the university would benefit, like data sciences, for instance, or genomics and genetics, the academy. So again, I would probably talk to George Pierce or someone in the provost's office.
And does any from the audience want to raise their hand, have any questions? Or you can still submit anonymously. Oh, we got one. Going back.
So this is for Jay. Have you ever thought of doing what you have done? The pitch was excellent for K through 12, taking your story but reforming it to their thought process. Because we, with Dr. Stansel there, we were doing stuff on quantum, and there was a guy out there that did it, and he did quantum for dummies and quantum for children, et cetera. But the same thing, if they can take it in their perspective, what you just done, not only for the people in this audience, but also people that are our new workforce and stuff like that, forming it.
Thank you for that question. Answer is yes. For 10 years, we did this at FREEDM. It's core part of the NSF program to have a K through 12 activity. So we had our graduate students go out and talk to the schools in the area. We brought in not faculty, teachers from the schools, you can call them faculty, I guess, to come to the lab and spend some time. So we were doing this routinely for about 10 years.
It's another book you can write.
Sorry?
It's another book.
I couldn't make that out, sorry. Yeah.
Oh, he was just asking, you could write a book about it.
Oh, right. I think other people are more qualified to write a book on this and probably have done it. Yeah, thank you.
Dr. Baliga, Mary Millsaps, I'm the Director of Research Compliance here. So I'm going to ask somewhat of a regulatory question.
Oh, did I miss being compliant?
No, not at all. I was really...
No, just joking.
My question goes to how have you structured your research and your entrepreneurship? You pointed out you keep them very separate,
yes,
but they're happening at the same time, often in parallel and related. Yes. Can you just talk about your thought process when you're navigating between those two sides of your incredible background?
So my preference was to license technology to companies because they are certainly in the space and they are well equipped to take it commercial. But sometimes the ideas are so novel that they're not willing to grasp the benefits and go for it. So then you have to rely on venture capital funding is the other alternative. So fortunately, that was a confluence of activities because NC State formed a venture fund and they came looking for people who could help them start companies. So I explained how I did it in two ways. One is to do a licensing model where I would support that company through my consulting activity, I guess, but still work full-time at the university so I don't have to stop supporting my students and all my agencies who provide funding. So you have to balance those two. But as I said, the VCs were not happy with that model because it's a trickle money model, not the kind they like. So then I had to take leave. So that was hard, a lot of stress and a lot of work, especially at the beginning, because if you do it alone and you have to do everything, meanwhile you're trying to build a company, it's extremely difficult. But I was successful there, but after 2 or 3 years, actually, the university, the chancellor kind of said, which way do you want to stay, which side do you want to stay? And I said, I think I'll come back to the university, and then I did those other companies. So it's a tough call each time. Yeah, if that company had gone really well, as we were trying to raise funds and become a billion-dollar company, then things would have been very different. I think I'd have to stay there.
We do have one more question, Dr. Baliga. Sorry for you that came in online. What advice would you give a PhD student who wants to patent something someday but they don't have any idea of where to start?
Oops. So in terms of patenting, I think I have an unusual track record, and that's not because I say so, it's because my patent attorney says so. I asked him to speak at one of my PSRC annual meetings, and he surprised me. He said, we have a company, a patenting company, lawyers, a company with about, how many did he say, 25 attorneys? And Baliga is the only one who has 100% track record. Everything we file gets issued as a patent. So that's unusual, not usual. Mostly they reject patents because they find something that's prior art or close enough to not wanting to grant the patent. So how do you avoid that? You avoid that by doing something really innovative that nobody has done before. But in my case, as I already mentioned, when I innovate, I don't believe that I've already innovated something. I go and look for whether anybody else has done it, and I spend a lot of time document what has been done. So when I give it to the attorney, we already have a full slate of things that we put in the patent, showing the examiner that we have something unique and different than prior art. And that's why it gets issued. And he says, in my case, it's unusual. Sometimes we get first office allowance, which is very rare. So that's why I gathered 50 patents in 10 years through that activity. But that's what I tell my students. Do the homework. If you want to patent this, go and do all that other stuff and come back and we'll talk about it. And then if it looks good, then we can go to the next stage and file a disclosure and do something. So, but that's just trying to get a patent. A patent is a very early part of the whole exercise of doing everything else. Most patents don't get commercialized. So.
I might stop our questions there. I guess, well, you're both on the stage, so I did want to say a big thank you to both Dr. Baliga and Dr. Vouk for their presentations today. So another round of applause for them.